A millionaire inherited a resort from his father and disguised himself as a janitor to test the employees. He was horrified when he heard the manager say something. The sun was setting over the crystal-clear waters of the Florida Keys, painting the sky in golden and reddish hues. The waves gently broke against the shore, creating a natural symphony that usually calmed Jasper Blackwood. However, this evening, not even the beauty of the sunset could quell the storm raging inside him. Jasper, a 28-year-old man, tall and athletic, stood on the balcony of the presidential suite at the Blue Paradise Resort. His hazel eyes, usually sparkling and full of life, now reflected a mixture of pain and confusion. His brown hair, typically perfectly styled, was disheveled from the countless times he had run his fingers through it in the last few hours. He wore an impeccable black suit, but his tie was loose, and the top buttons of his white shirt were undone. In his right hand, he held a barely touched glass of whiskey. The news he had received that morning had changed his life forever. William Blackwood, his father, and a tourism magnate, had suddenly passed away from a heart attack. The sound of the door opening snapped Jasper out of his thoughts. He turned to see Sarah, his mother, enter the room. Despite the evident sadness on her face, Sarah maintained the elegance and poise that characterized her. Her black hair, sprinkled with some gray, was pulled back in an impeccable bun, and her black designer dress accentuated her slender figure. "Jasper, darling," Sarah said softly, approaching her son. "The reading of the will is in an hour. You should get ready." Jasper nodded mechanically, taking a sip of his whiskey before setting the glass on the nearest table. "I still can't believe he's gone, Mom," he murmured. His voice broken by contained emotions, Sarah approached and hugged him, allowing herself for a moment to show her own vulnerability. "I know, my love, I can't believe it either. Your father was a strong man, full of life. I never thought he'd leave us so soon." They separated after a moment, and Sarah took her son's face in her hands, looking directly into his eyes. "But now we must be strong, Jasper. Your father built an empire, and now it's up to us to maintain his legacy." Jasper felt a knot in his stomach at his mother's words. He knew this moment would eventually come, but he had always thought he'd have more time, that his father would be there to guide him. Now suddenly, all the weight of family expectations fell on his shoulders. "I don't know if I'm ready for this, Mom," he confessed, moving away and walking back to the balcony. "Dad always wanted me to get more involved in the business, but I always found excuses not to do it." Sarah followed her son, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Your father understood that you needed your own space, Jasper. He never pressured you too much because he trusted that, when the time came, you'd rise to the occasion." Jasper turned to look at his mother, doubt clearly visible in his eyes. "What if I'm not? What if I can't handle all this?" "You will be," Sarah affirmed with conviction. "You're a Blackwood, Jasper. You have your father's entrepreneurial spirit in your blood. You may not have been directly involved in the business until now, but you've grown up surrounded by it. You know this world better than you think." Before Jasper could respond, a knock on the door interrupted the conversation. It was Linda, the family's personal assistant, a middle-aged woman with thin-rimmed glasses and a gray pantsuit. "Excuse the interruption," Linda said in a professional tone. "The family lawyer has arrived and is ready to proceed with the reading of the will when you are." Sarah nodded. "Thank you, Linda. We'll be there in a few minutes." When Linda withdrew, Sarah turned to her son once more. "It's time, Jasper. I know it's difficult, but we must face this together. Your father would want us to be strong." Jasper took a deep breath, straightened his tie, and buttoned his shirt. "You're right, Mom. Let's do this." Together, mother and son left the suite and headed towards the resort's boardroom, where the fate of the Blackwood Empire was about to be revealed. The boardroom was an imposing space, with a large mahogany table in the center and black leather chairs around it. The walls were adorned with photographs showing the history of the Blue Paradise Resort, from its inauguration 3 decades ago to its most recent expansions. In each image, the figure of William Blackwood stood out, his confident smile and visionary gaze captured for posterity. Jasper couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt as he looked at these images. While his father had been building this empire, He had been more concerned with enjoying the fruits of that work than with learning how to maintain and grow it. Already seated around the table were several key figures in the Blackwoods' life and business. There was Mark Thompson, the resort's general manager, a man in his 50s with graying hair and a shrewd look behind his designer glasses. Next to him, Emily Rodriguez, the head of personnel, a woman in her 40s with brown hair tied back in a bun, and warm eyes that reflected a deep sadness for William's loss. Also present was Robert Davis, the head accountant, a short and plump man with incipient baldness and fingers that wouldn't stop fiddling with his tie. And finally, at the head of the table, was George Sullivan, the Blackwood family lawyer, a man in his 60s with white hair and a serious expression. When Jasper and Sarah entered the room, everyone stood up out of respect. There was an exchange of silent greetings, handshakes, and brief hugs. The atmosphere was solemn, filled with contained emotions and unexpressed expectations. Once everyone was seated, Lawyer Sullivan cleared his throat and began to speak. "We are gathered here for the reading of Mr. William Blackwood's will," he announced in a grave voice. "Before proceeding, I would like to express my sincerest condolences to the family and all present. William was not only my client for over 30 years, but also a close friend. His loss is a blow. To all of us." He paused, allowing his words to settle before continuing. "Now, I will proceed with the reading of the will." Sullivan took out a sealed envelope from his briefcase and carefully opened it. He extracted several documents and began to read. "I, William Blackwood of sound mind, declare this to be my last will and testament." Jasper listened with a mixture of anxiety and fear. Although he had always known he would inherit the family business someday, the reality of that moment hit him hard. His gaze briefly met Emily's, who offered him a comforting smile. He had always appreciated Emily's warmth, who had been almost like a second mother to him during his upbringing. "And it is my wish that my only son, Jasper Blackwood, inherit the totality of my shares and properties, including but not limited to the Blue Paradise Resort and all its extensions and associated properties." A murmur ran through the room. Although everyone expected this decision, hearing it out loud made it real and definitive. Jasper felt the weight on his shoulders multiply. He saw Mark Thompson raise an eyebrow, his expression indecipherable. "However," the lawyer continued, and everyone in the room tensed at this word, "this inheritance is subject to a condition." Jasper straightened in his chair, his heart beating fast. "A condition?" His father had never mentioned anything about this to him. To take full possession of the inheritance and assume total control of the Blue Paradise Resort, Jasper must work in every department of the resort for a period of 6 months, starting from the lowest position in each area. During this time, he must use a false name and not reveal his true identity to anyone outside this room. The silence that followed. These words were deafening. Jasper looked around, seeing the surprise reflected on the faces of everyone present. His mother, Sarah, seemed as surprised as he was. "If Jasper successfully completes this 6-month period," Sullivan continued, "he will assume full control of the resort and all associated properties. If he chooses not to comply with this condition, or if he reveals his identity before time, ownership of the resort will pass to a board of directors composed of the current department heads, and Jasper will only receive a monthly allowance." Jasper was speechless. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. His father, even after his death, was still challenging him, pushing him to get involved in the business in a way he had never imagined. "Dad," he muttered to himself, a mixture of frustration and admiration in his voice. Lawyer Sullivan continued reading some minor provisions of the will, but Jasper barely listened. His mind was trying to process what this condition meant. He would have to abandon his life of luxury, his identity, and everything he knew to completely immerse himself in the workings of the resort from the most basic level. When Sullivan finished reading, the room was silent for a few moments. It was Sarah who spoke first. "George," she said, addressing the lawyer, "were you aware of this condition?" Sullivan shook his head. "William gave me this sealed envelope a few months ago, with strict instructions not to open it until this moment. I'm as surprised as all of you." Mark Thompson cleared his throat. "If I may," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I believe Mr. Blackwood has once again demonstrated his genius. This condition will ensure that the future leader of the resort knows its operation thoroughly." Emily nodded, adding, "Plus, it will give Jasper the opportunity to really get to know our staff and understand their needs and challenges." Jasper listened to these comments in silence, his mind still trying to process the situation. Finally, he stood up, all eyes turning to him. He began, his voice shaky at first, but gaining firmness as he spoke. "I accept my father's condition. I know I haven't been as involved in the business as I should have been, but I'm willing to learn, to work hard, and to honor my father's legacy." Sarah took her son's hand, her eyes shining with pride and concern in equal measure. "Jasper, are you sure? 6 months is a long time, and you'll have to give up everything you know." Jasper nodded, a new determination shining in his eyes. "I'm sure Mom-Dad always wanted me to truly understand the business, and now I see why it's time for me to take on my responsibility." Lawyer Sullivan stood up. "Very well then. According to William's instructions, the 6-month period will begin in a week. During this time, Jasper, you must prepare for your new identity. The rest of you," he said, looking at Mark, Emily, and Robert, "must keep the secret of Jasper's true identity. Is that clear?" Everyone nodded solemnly. "Excellent," Sullivan continued. "Now, there are some additional details we need to discuss." As the lawyer continued to talk about the legal and logistical aspects of the situation, Jasper allowed himself a moment to reflect. His life was about to change, drastically. He would go from being the playboy heir to a simple maintenance employee. The idea both terrified and excited him in equal measure. He looked at the photos of his father on the walls, the smiling and confident face of William Blackwood. For the first time in a long time, Jasper felt he truly understood his father. This final challenge was William's ultimate gift, the opportunity for Jasper to prove himself, not just to others, but to himself. "I'll make you proud, Dad," Jasper thought, a new determination burning inside him. The following days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Jasper had to prepare for his new life as Jack, the name he had chosen for his alter ego. With the help of Emily, who had offered to oversee his transformation, Jasper began to plan the details of his new identity. One afternoon, while reviewing the final details in Emily's office, Jasper couldn't help but express his doubts. "Emily, do you think I can really do this? Do you think I can fool everyone and live as a common employee for 6 months?" Emily, who was reviewing some documents, looked up and gave him a warm smile. "Jasper, I've watched you grow up. I know you have a good heart, and that you're more capable than you think. Your father wouldn't have proposed this challenge if he didn't believe you could overcome it." Jasper nodded, grateful for the support. "Thank you, Emily. I don't know what I'd do without you. You've always been there for me, even when I was a spoiled brat." Emily laughed softly. "Oh, you had your moments, but I always knew there was a good man underneath all that rich kid facade." Her expression turned more serious. "Jasper, there's something I need to tell you. Your father and I were very close. He wasn't just my boss, but also a dear friend." Jasper looked at her curiously. He had always noticed that his father had a special respect for Emily, but he had never thought much about it. Emily continued, "William confided many things about the resort to me, about his plans for the future. He wanted me to guide you through this process, but without interfering too much. He wanted you to discover things for yourself." "What do you mean?" Jasper asked, intrigued. Emily sighed deeply. "Just that there's more to this resort than meets the eye, Jasper. Your father built something special here, something that goes beyond a simple business. I hope that during these 6 months you can discover what Blue Paradise really means." Before Jasper could ask more, the office door burst open. Mark Thompson entered, his face a mask of barely contained irritation. "Emily, I need to talk to you about the new vendor contracts," Mark said, deliberately ignoring Jasper. Emily stood up, her expression changing to one of professionalism. "Of course, Mark. Jasper, do you mind if we continue this later?" Jasper nodded, noticing the tension in the air. As he headed for the door, He couldn't help but notice the cold look Mark gave him. He had always felt that the general manager didn't appreciate him much, but now that antipathy seemed to have increased. As he left the office, Jasper came face to face with Robert, the head accountant, who seemed about to knock on the door. "Oh, Jasper," Robert said, clearly surprised. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I was just finalizing some details with Emily," Jasper responded, noticing the nervousness in Robert's voice. Right, Robert muttered, passing by Jasper to enter the office. "If you'll excuse me." Jasper stood in the hallway, reflecting on the events of the past few days. There were tensions and secrets at the resort that he had never noticed before. What else would he discover during his time as Jack? The morning Jasper was to begin his new life as Jack came too soon for his liking. He woke up before dawn, his stomach churning with a mixture of nerves and anticipation. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the man staring back at him. His hair, once perfectly styled, was now longer and messy. A several-day-old beard partially covered his distinctive features. The designer clothes had been replaced by worn jeans and a simple t-shirt. "Good morning, Jack," he muttered to himself, practicing the deeper tone of voice he would use for the next 6 months. A soft knock on the door snapped him out of his thoughts. It was his mother, Sarah, who entered with a worried expression on her face. "Are you ready, honey?" she asked, her voice tinged with emotion. Jasper nodded, unable to find the right words. Sarah approached and hugged him tightly. "Remember, no matter what happens, I'm proud of you," she whispered. "Your father would be too." Jasper allowed himself a moment of vulnerability in his mother's arms before pulling away and grabbing his backpack. "It's time," he said, his voice firmer than he felt. Together, mother and son left the presidential suite for the last time in the next 6 months. They walked in silence through the resort's corridors, still deserted at this early hour upon reaching the service entrance. Where Emily was waiting for them, Sarah hugged her son one more time. "Take care of yourself, my love," she said, with tears in her eyes. "And remember, if at any point you feel you can't go on, you can always quit. Your well-being is more important than any inheritance." Jasper nodded, grateful for his mother's unconditional support. "I will, Mom. I love you." With one last hug, Jasper separated from his mother and approached Emily, who was waiting for him with a determined expression on her face. "Ready, Jack?" Emily asked, using his new name to help him get into character. "Jasper, no, Jack," he nodded. "Ready." Emily handed him a maintenance uniform and an ID card. "Welcome to Blue Paradise Resort. Jack, your shift starts in 15 minutes. Martin, the head of maintenance, will be waiting for you in the supply room." Jack took the uniform and card, feeling the weight of his new reality. With one last look at his mother, who was watching from a distance, he entered through the service door, leaving behind his life of luxury and privilege. The service hallway was a completely different world from the resort Jack knew. The walls, instead of the luxurious wallpaper that adorned the guest areas, were painted a simple and functional beige color. The floor was polished concrete, far from the Persian rugs and marble floors he was accustomed to. As he walked towards the supply room, Jack crossed paths with several employees, starting their shifts. Some looked at him curiously, others barely paid him attention, immersed in their own morning routines. For the first time in his life, Jack experienced what it was like to be completely anonymous, just another face in the crowd. Upon reaching the supply room, he met Martin, a robust man in his 50s, with a thick mustache and calloused hands that spoke of years of hard work. "You must be the new guy, Jack," Martin said, evaluating him with a critical look. "I hope you're ready to work hard. We don't tolerate slackers here." Jack nodded, trying to project a confidence he didn't feel. "Yes, sir. I'm ready to learn and work hard," Martin grunted, apparently satisfied with the response. "Good. Put on the uniform and follow me. We have a lot to do before the guests wake up." As he changed in the small dressing room adjacent to the supply room, Jack couldn't help but think about how surreal the whole situation was. Just a week ago, he was the heir to the resort, living a life of luxury and comfort.